Mrs. Lillian Harris had never felt the weight of judgment so sharply in her life as she did that morning. Stepping out of her modest car and onto the gravel driveway of one of the city's grandest mansions, her hands clutching her leather portfolio like armor. At 73, she had spent decades quietly building a life rich with knowledge, experience, and integrity. Yet she had also spent decades seeing how the world often decided her worth before she even spoke, because of the color of her skin. She had worked tirelessly, raised a family, and devoted herself to preserving the legacies of art and history in museums across the country. But here she was, stepping into the house of one of the city's wealthiest collectors, and already feeling the subtle, unspoken dismissal radiating from the staff who greeted her. When the door opened, and the young man named Jason blinked at her with a mix of confusion and barely concealed condescension. Asking her name and hesitating before letting her in, she felt the familiar sting, the invisible barrier that people thought they could place in front of her simply because she was black, simply because her hair was grey and her hands showed the calluses of a lifetime of work. As she stepped into the grand foyer, her heels echoing against the marble floor, she noticed the whispers of the young white staff, the half-smiles, the exchanged glances that said, without words, "This isn't your place." She had experienced this before. Many times, in elevators, in offices, in restaurants, people assuming she was there to clean, to serve, to occupy a space of subservience rather than authority. But Lillian Harris had never let assumptions define her. She had learned early that dignity and calm composure could speak louder than anger, and she would wield them now with all the quiet power she had cultivated in a long life. When the head housekeeper, Clara, looked her up and down with a mixture of surprise and thinly veiled disdain, Lillian met her gaze with a soft, unwavering smile, and introduced herself clearly, stating her purpose. She was there to speak with Mr. Whitmore about the donation of his art collection to the museum. Clara's smirk faltered for the first time, as if she had not expected a woman like Lillian to carry herself with such confidence and authority. Jason fumbled awkwardly, calling for Mr. Whitmore while glancing at Lillian, as if trying to reconcile the image of an elderly black woman with the authority she radiated. When she was finally ushered into the study, Mr. Whitmore himself looked up from his papers, squinting at her in curiosity. "Ah, you must be," he began. "Lillian Harris," she said, her voice steady, calm, but carrying a quiet steel that commanded attention. "I'm here regarding your art collection donation. I've curated similar collections for decades and have extensive experience in appraisal, provenance, and preservation." There was a pause. A tension in the air so thick Lillian could feel it pressing against her chest, a mixture of disbelief, judgment, and the slow creeping realization that the assumptions they had made about her were entirely wrong. She could see the subtle shame begin to form on Jason's face, the slight reddening on Clara's cheeks as she realized the depth of her own prejudice, though no one admitted it aloud. Lillian laid her portfolio on the mahogany desk, flipping through pages of letters, references, and photographs of museum exhibitions she had worked on, her hands steady despite the years and the adrenaline pulsing through her veins. "I've worked with museums in New York, Chicago, and Paris," she said. "I've authenticated rare 18th century paintings, managed complex acquisitions, and overseen major exhibitions. I have references from directors, curators, and historians. Everything here is documented." Mr. Whitmore leaned back in his chair, blinking, trying to reconcile the confident, articulate woman before him with the stereotype his mind had conjured the moment he saw her. The room, once thick with condescension, shifted imperceptibly as her words sank in. It was not confrontation, not anger, not raising her voice that made the difference. It was the truth, presented with unshakable calm that began to dismantle the invisible walls they had built around her. Jason, who had been avoiding eye contact, finally cleared his throat and muttered, I apologize. I didn't think—" Lillian smiled softly, shaking her head gently. "It's all right. That's the thing about assumptions. They are easy to make, but much harder to unlearn. What matters is how we act once we realize them." And she meant it, not a sharp reprimand, not bitterness, but a lesson delivered with grace, a life lived fully and unapologetically, refusing to bow to the narrow expectations of a world too often blinded by prejudice. Mr. Whitmore, now fully attentive, asked her to walk through the gallery, showing her the collection, while she explained the provenance, the historical context, the significance of each brushstroke, each color choice, the subtle nuances that could easily be overlooked by someone less trained, less observant, less committed. Her words carried the weight of decades of passion, of expertise, of living in a world that too often underestimated her, dismissed her, and assumed her role before giving her a chance to speak. As they walked, Jason and Clara lingered behind, absorbing the ease and authority with which she carried herself, the depth of knowledge she displayed effortlessly, and the unmistakable dignity she exuded. Clara, who had smirked earlier, now whispered to herself, I didn't realize. And for once, the whisper was honest, a recognition of her own flawed assumptions. Lillian's calmness was not just a shield, it was a weapon against ignorance, a way to make them confront the uncomfortable truth, that talent, experience, and worth are not determined by skin color or age. Weeks passed, and Lillian's presence at the mansion began to transform the environment. Staff who had once whispered and judged now sought her advice, respected her opinion, and looked to her for guidance on curatorial decisions. Jason, humbled and reflective, approached her one afternoon with genuine remorse in his eyes. "Mrs. Harris," he said quietly, "I owe you more than an apology. I judged you. I made assumptions that were completely unfair." Lillian regarded him with kindness, the soft warmth of someone who had endured countless slights and learned that real strength lies in understanding, not resentment. "It's all right," she said, her voice gentle yet firm. "Judgment is easy. Understanding, that takes work. But it is never too late to start." By the end of the season, Lillian's name was inscribed on a plaque in the museum for the collection she curated, and her work received accolades from the director and the board. Mr. Whitmore publicly acknowledged the error of his assumptions and praised her professionalism and unmatched expertise. The mansion, once a place that had seemed almost hostile in its quiet condescension, had become a stage for justice, the quiet, deliberate kind that comes not from revenge, but from living one's truth with dignity and excellence. In the hearts of those who had doubted her, seeds of reflection and humility had been planted. In her own heart, Lillian felt the satisfaction of having fought not with anger, but with integrity, showing the world that assumptions based on skin color are fragile illusions that crumble in the face of real skill, in knowledge and character. As she walked through the gallery one final time, sunlight streaming through the grand windows and illuminating the paintings she had fought to honor, she allowed herself a quiet smile, in knowing that she had not only proven her worth, but had also left a lesson imprinted in the minds of those who had doubted her. That the content of one's character, the depth of one's knowledge, and the strength of one's spirit matter far more than the shallow judgments of a world too often blinded by prejudice. And in that realization, she found a quiet, enduring triumph. A reminder that dignity and excellence can dismantle prejudice, that assumptions can be challenged not with anger but with calm authority, and that justice, in its most profound form, comes when truth shines brighter than ignorance, leaving behind a legacy that speaks louder than words ever could, teaching those who witnessed it that racism is not only a reflection of bias, but a challenge, one that can be overcome with integrity, skill, and unwavering humanity.